There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a man after a certain age. Not the peaceful quiet of a summer evening, not the comfortable quiet of a home where everything is in its right place, but a different kind, heavier, the kind that comes not from stillness, but from things left unsaid for so long that they no longer feel like words at all. They have become part of the walls, part of the air. Most people never notice it, not in others, not even in themselves, not at first. And that perhaps is what makes it so difficult to talk about. If you ask most men over the age of 50 how they are doing, they will say something like, not bad, or getting along, or simply, fine. And they will mean all of these things, and none of them. There is an entire language of restraint that many men learn, not consciously, not from any single teacher, but slowly, over decades, from watching fathers who never spoke about fear, from workplaces where vulnerability was mistaken for weakness, from friendships where the conversation always circled back to work, or sport, or something in the news, but never quite landed anywhere close to the heart. By the time a man reaches 60, this language can be so deeply embedded that he may no longer know there is another one available to him. He is not lying when he says he is fine. He has simply forgotten, or perhaps never learned, how to say what is actually true. Let me tell you about a man named Eric. Not because his story is dramatic. It isn't. It is, in fact, extraordinarily ordinary. And that is exactly the point. Eric is 63 years old. He lives in a modest house on the edge of a small Swedish town. He retired 2 years ago from a job he held for over 30 years. Something in logistics, managing schedules and shipments, a job that required precision and reliability. He was good at it. His colleagues respected him. There were even moments when he found something close to meaning in it. And then it ended. Not dramatically, not with conflict or crisis. The company gave him a small gathering, a card signed by people he had worked beside for decades, a bottle of wine, and a handshake. And then he drove home on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, put the wine on the kitchen counter, and sat down at the kitchen table. He sat there for a long time. His wife, Ingrid, was still working. She had another few years before her own retirement. His children lived in other cities, building their own lives, which is exactly what he and Ingrid had always hoped for them. The house was quiet in a way it had never quite been before. And Eric, who had managed complexity for 30 years, who could track shipments across 3 countries and resolve problems before anyone else had noticed them, did not quite know what to do with a Tuesday afternoon. This is a moment that does not get spoken about much. The transition from a working life to whatever comes after. For women, the research suggests this transition often unfolds within the context of relationships. They talk to friends, to family, to someone. They tend to have built networks of closeness that carry them through change. For many men, particularly men of Eric's generation, the network was always thinner than it looked. The friendships of working life were, more often than not, relationships of proximity. People you liked because you saw them every day. Remove the daily contact, and the connection, which had never needed to be tended like a garden, quietly begins to thin. Eric discovered this slowly. He tried calling a former colleague in the first weeks after retirement. They spoke for a while, but the conversation felt strange. The shared language of the office, the shorthand, the complaints, the familiar rhythms, none of it quite translated outside the walls where it had lived. He tried again once more. After that, he stopped trying. It would be a mistake to call Eric lonely in any simple way. He and Ingrid had been married for 35 years. They shared a home, shared meals, shared a history so layered and long that sometimes simply sitting in the same room carried a kind of wordless meaning. But there are things Eric had never said to Ingrid, not because he did not trust her, not because the marriage was troubled, but because somewhere along the way, he had developed a habit of carrying certain things alone. The worry about whether he had made enough of his life, the quiet grief of watching his own father decline in his final years, and feeling even now a grief he had never quite put into words. The fear, small but persistent, that now, without the structure of work, he might not know who exactly he was. These things moved inside him like weather. He could feel them. He simply did not have the habit of speaking about them. And without the habit, the act of beginning felt enormous, almost impossible. So he would say when Ingrid asked, "I'm fine, just adjusting," and she would nod because she knew him and because she had learned that pressing further rarely helped, and because she, too, was carrying things she did not always say. There is a particular kind of marital loneliness that no one warns you about. It is possible to spend 35 years with someone, to know their habits and their face, and the exact way they breathe when they are almost asleep, and still feel that something, some essential, private chamber of yourself, has never fully been shared. This is not a tragedy, or rather, it need not be. It is simply a truth about human beings. We are not entirely knowable, even to those who love us most. But for some men, this chamber grows larger with age, because the other places where the self might have been expressed, work, friendship, purpose, physical strength, begin to contract. And what remains is a quiet that has nowhere to go. Eric began taking walks, not because anyone suggested it, not to lose weight or to meet people or to pursue any particular goal. He began walking because it was something to do with his body, while his mind moved through its weather. He walked in the mornings when the town was still half asleep, along the edge of the lake, through the park where the birch trees stood bare and silver in the early November light. Sometimes he walked for an hour, sometimes longer. There were days when he felt something close to peace on these walks, a kind of emptiness that was not unpleasant. The cold air, the sound of his own footsteps, the absence of any expectation. There were other days when the walks filled him with a sadness he could not explain. He would pass older men sitting on benches, men in their 70s or 80s, alone, looking out at the water, and something in him would tighten, not with pity, with recognition. He had not expected that. We do not talk honestly about what age does to a man's sense of himself. We have certain stories we tell: the dignified elder, the wise grandfather, the man who has finally made peace with life. These are beautiful stories. They are sometimes even true. But between here and there, between the middle years and whatever wisdom might eventually arrive, there is a territory that many men cross without a map. The body begins to speak in ways it never used to. A shoulder that aches, stares that take slightly more effort than they once did. Looking in the mirror and seeing not exactly a stranger, but someone you did not entirely anticipate becoming. These things seem small. They are small. And yet accumulated over time, they carry weight. And the internal landscape shifts as well. The question that once felt abstract, what is this life for, becomes less abstract with every year. Not urgent, not panicked, just quietly, persistently present. For men who were never taught to explore such questions with other people, this can become a very private journey, a very solitary one. Eric's father had died 7 years earlier. They had not been close in any demonstrative way. His father was a man who expressed love primarily through action, through showing up, through fixing things, through being present in a quiet, dependable way. They had rarely spoken about feelings, but Eric had understood, in the way you sometimes understand things without being told, that he was loved. At the funeral, Eric had not cried, not because he was not grieving, but because the grief was too large, and he had nowhere to put it. He gave the small eulogy he had prepared. He accepted the condolences. He drove his mother home and made sure she had what she needed. And then he went home and sat in the kitchen, alone in the dark, for a long time. He did not tell anyone about that night. Not Ingrid, not his brother. It felt like something that belonged only to him, sealed away inside him. And in some strange way, he had come to value that. As if grief were a private territory he needed to keep inviolate. Now, 7 years later, he sometimes felt the loss in unexpected places. Watching an old man at a petrol station struggle slightly with a bag of groceries. Hearing a particular kind of music on the radio, something his father had liked. Passing a hardware store for reasons he could not fully explain. Grief, he had learned, does not keep a schedule. And yet he had never spoken about any of this. It lived in him, complete and without language, like a room in the house that had never quite been opened. There is something that happens between men, particularly men of a certain generation, that is almost like an agreement, an unspoken agreement to stay on the surface. The conversations are real. The laughter is real. The care, if you look at it carefully, is real. But there are depths that are simply, by mutual and unspoken consent, not visited. The reasons for this are complex. Some of it is generational. Ideas about masculinity that were absorbed so early and so completely that they barely feel like ideas at all. They feel like nature, like water. Some of it is protected, because if you begin to speak about certain things, you must also be prepared to hear them reflected back. And that requires a kind of vulnerability that most men were never given permission to develop. Some of it, too, is simply that the habit was never built. And to build a new habit at 60 or 65, after a lifetime of doing things a certain way, requires an effort that can feel almost physical. So many men carry certain things alone, not because they are weak, not because they do not feel, but because carrying things alone is what they learned, and learning is very hard to unlearn. Eric's son called on a Sunday afternoon in December. They talked for a while about the boy's job, about a trip he and his partner were planning, about the weather, which had turned cold early that year. The conversation was warm, easy. Eric liked his son deeply, admired the person he had become. At the end of the call, his son said, "Are you doing okay, Dad? You sound a bit, I don't know. Tired, maybe?" Eric paused for just a moment. "I'm fine," he said. "Just the dark season. You know how it is." His son said he did, and they said goodbye. And Eric put the phone down and looked out at the garden, which was frozen and still under a pale December sky. He sat for a moment. He thought about what he might have said instead. Not anything dramatic. Nothing that would have alarmed his son or required an immediate response. Just something true. Something small and honest. He could not quite find it. The words were there, somewhere, but the path to them was not well worn. He made himself a cup of coffee and listened to the house settle around him. This is not a story about suffering in any acute or visible way. Eric is not in crisis. He is not ill. He is not in a marriage that has failed. He is not consumed by darkness. He is simply a man in the middle of ordinary life, carrying things quietly, as he always has, as many men do. And perhaps the question worth sitting with is not whether this is acceptable. It is, in many ways, simply human, but whether it is the only way, whether there are other options available, and why, for so many men, those options can feel so far out of reach. There is a Finnish word, not easily translated, for the particular feeling of being at peace with one's own company. The Finns understand something about necessary silence that many cultures do not. But silence and isolation are not the same thing. Peace and loneliness are not the same thing. There is a version of quietness that is sustaining, that comes from a life that has been, in some way, honestly inhabited, where things have been felt and spoken at least sometimes, where the private rooms of the self have not been sealed forever, but opened occasionally to let in light. And there is another kind of quiet that is simply absence. That is what remains when the words were never found, when the connections were never made, when the years passed in a kind of responsible, competent, decent silence that left certain essential things untouched. Many men spend much of their lives in the second kind without fully knowing it. Eric is not a sad man. On most mornings, he finds something in his walk by the lake that feels like enough. A heron standing still in the shallow water. The way the frost catches the low winter light. The reliable rhythm of his own breath in the cold air. He tends his house. He cooks simple meals. He and Ingrid sit in the evenings and watch something on television or read. On weekends, they sometimes drive to visit her sister and spend an afternoon in a warm kitchen, drinking coffee and talking about ordinary things. His life, measured against any reasonable standard, is a good one. And yet, there is a room inside him that has never been entered, that may never be entered, where a whole collection of things, losses, fears, questions, moments of grace, private joys, private griefs, sit in a kind of suspended existence, known only to him, not fully processed even by him. This is not unusual. It may in fact be nearly universal among men of his generation. That does not mean it costs nothing. What would it mean to speak? Not to perform emotion, not to confess, not to unburden in a way that places weight on someone else, but simply to say, once in a while, to someone who could bear it, this is what I have been carrying. It does not need to be a dramatic conversation. It does not need to resolve into understanding or comfort or any particular outcome. It might simply be a beginning, a small acknowledgement that the interior life exists, that it matters, that there is something there worth, at least occasionally, putting into words. For some men, this is a journey that begins late, in their 60s or their 70s, sometimes later. Sometimes after a loss that breaks something open, or a moment of illness that forces a reckoning. Sometimes simply after sitting long enough with the quiet that it finally becomes impossible to ignore. And sometimes it does not begin at all, and the years pass, and the rooms stay sealed, and the man is buried eventually, with everything he never said still inside him. Neither of these outcomes is certain. Most men live somewhere between them, carrying some things alone, sharing others imperfectly, moving through their days in the particular combination of connection and isolation that is simply their life. There is no lesson here. There is no instruction for what to do or how to do it. This is not that kind of story. But there is perhaps a kind of recognition. If you are a man who has carried things quietly for most of his life, you may hear something familiar in these words. Not a judgment, not an invitation to immediately change. Just the simple acknowledgement that the weight exists, that you are not the only one who carries it. And if you know a man like Eric, a father, a husband, an old friend, a neighbor, and you have the sense that behind his fine and his not bad, there is something more complex, something heavier, something that has never quite found the door. Perhaps there is a small kindness in simply noticing, in not filling the silence with the first thing that comes, in letting the question stand open just a little longer than usual. People often do not need to be fixed. Sometimes they simply need to know they have been seen. The light comes late in the north in winter. By the time Eric finishes his walk and returns to the house, the morning is just beginning to gray at the edges of the sky. He takes off his coat and his boots and fills the kettle and stands at the kitchen window, watching the color come back into the world. There is a particular quality to this light, thin pale, arriving almost apologetically, as if it knows it will not stay long. But it is real. It reaches the frost on the window glass and the bare branches of the rowan tree in the garden, and the small figure of his wife, visible now, moving slowly in the bedroom upstairs, beginning her own morning. He pours his coffee. He stands. He watches the light for a while. And what he is feeling this morning, as on many mornings, he could not easily put it into words. But it is there. All of it is there. If this quiet moment resonated with you, you are always welcome here. This channel was created for slow reflections, honest emotions, and the thoughts many people carry silently through life. If you'd like more stories like this, you can gently subscribe and return whenever you need a peaceful place to think, feel, or simply listen. Thank you for spending this moment here tonight. Take care of yourself and rest well.